Hi, I'm Nancy Harrington. It's December 20th, 2012, and I'm conducting an interview with Bertram Van Munster on behalf of the Archive of American Television at the Montage Hotel in Beverly Hills. Okay, we'd like to start by talking a little bit about your early years, your childhood. So what was your name at birth?
My name at birth was Bertram Jacob Caesar Van Munster. The name has been in the family for quite a while. The initials and the name, so that's how I got it.
And when and where were you born?
I was born in Amsterdam in October 25th, 1940.
What was your father's name and what did he do?
My father's name was Anton Willem Van Munster, and he was a businessman.
And what was your mother's name and what did she do?
Her name was Gijsberta Jacoba de Bruin, and she was a housewife.
And what traits did you inherit from your parents?
Well, I think tenacity, probably, never give up. I think I got manners, diplomacy, learn about the world. My family traveled quite extensively already around the world in the 20s and the 30s. So I always got a global perspective, also how to look at things.
Do you have any siblings?
I had two brothers. They unfortunately both passed. Oldest one is Jan. He was in the merchant navy. He died of a brain tumor early on in his life. And my second brother, Anton, who was a cinematographer and very, very good cinematographer, just passed away recently, also with a brain tumor.
Sorry about that. What were your interests growing up?
My interest was always geography. I had a great affinity for that. I liked it. I enjoyed it very much. I liked to ride on my bike, and I loved cars. And I loved sailing. All the Dutch kind of things,
Did you watch television as a kid?
Well, there was no television as a kid, believe it or not. Television became like in the 50s. And what we would do sometimes is one family in the neighborhood would have a television, and then we would look over the edge and see if we could get a glimpse of the television. And only a few people would be invited to come inside. So this is my first experience with television, but it was fascinating. And then later on, we got a television. We bought a television, black and white, of course. And it was just this miracle machine in your living room. This was fantastic. So.
Now, in those days, there was no American television overseas.
Oh yes, there was American television. There was the Flintstones, which was primetime television in Holland. The Flintstones were very popular, and maybe Car 54, Where Are You? Which is still, I think, one of the better TV shows.
What high school did you go to?
I went to a Nieuw Lyceum in Hilversum.
And what type of activities were you involved in?
Just studying, just regular studying. I mean, sports is not a big deal. Was never a really big deal. But sports in Holland automatically translates into soccer, football.
What did you want to be when you grew up?
I wasn't sure, but my brother had a great interest in photography and cinematography, and he went to the Centro Sperimentale in Rome, and actually he got me really interested in cinematography at a very early age. I went on some shoots with him, when he was an assistant, etc., etc. So that's kind of how it perked my interest.
Did you go to university?
Yes, I did.
Where'd you go?
I went to Munich. And around the corner, and this is where I got my first job, around the corner, I had to make a living. Around the corner there's the Arri factory. Arnold and Richter, this is the company that makes movie cameras, etc. But they also had studios. And I worked in the film lab there on a night shift for Fox Movie Tone News. It also sounds very... But in the old days... once a week there was a newsreel in the movie theaters, so that was only once a week. That's how slow the news was, and it was a big deal. And I worked in the lab and developed these newsreels in the night shift. So that was my first job where I really had my hands on film, 35mm film.
What did you study while you were in school?
Well, I studied art history, and I always had a great deal of interest in political science.
And what did you do after graduation?
Well, I went back to Holland. And I got back tried to get back into the film business. I had a pretty good experience as an assistant at that point. You know, I worked on some big movies with some famous cinematographers as a third assistant, clapper loader. But you know, I had a good idea, and I got a job as a cameraman for Fox Movietone News and United Press International, and they sent me out on all these events. One was the earthquake in Agadir, which was like completely frightening. But they also sent me out on all kinds of other activities, football, soccer games, what have you, you know. And if I can elaborate on this for a little bit, it was very interesting to see. There's a big soccer game once a year, and it is Holland versus Belgium. This is the big thing. And so they sent me out there for United Press. They sent me out there and said, you got to cover the soccer game. But they gave me 2 rolls of film. Because, you know, in those days, a roll of film was very valuable. And they gave me this big Mitchell rack-over camera. And so I was the youngest. I was like 21 years old or something, 22 years old. I was a kid. And there's all these veteran cameramen sitting there. There's a whole battery of cameras there. And I'm following this. All the people are screaming in the thing, and I'm following the action. And I think, oh, you're going to hit a goal. I hit the button, and the cameras are gone. But nobody else, I didn't realize nobody else was rolling. And they missed it, boom. So I turned off the camera, stopped the camera, you know, because it used to spin around. You know, you have to grab the wheel on the cassette. And, you know, and I followed a couple of times, and every time there was no goal. And none of these guys, they were filming. They were just sitting, smoking cigarettes and talking to each other. I think there's something wrong here. And I try one more time, and boom, boom, boom. I'm out of film. 1 roll, gone, no goals, no nothing. And these guys are all sitting there. And at the end, and all of a sudden I'm looking at these guys, and all they go, and they hit the button, and goal! And I barely got it. I got it. But so these guys, that's where the first time I saw, that's what it takes to be a pro. To just keep an eye on this stuff and know when to hit the button. And out of 3 goals, I came back with 2, which is not good enough. But that's the first time I realized, wow, these guys are pros. They know how to do this. So I did this for about a year. I worked for those guys, and it was really interesting. And then there was a job opening as a cinematographer at a company in Amsterdam. And my brother was there, and he went to do another picture. My brother was older than I am. And I went there, and there was a guy there by the name of Max Fisher, who says to me, you're not an assistant, you can be a cinematographer. I said, well, I'm not a cinematographer, I just did newsreel for these guys. And he said, no, you can do it after an interview. He said, you can do it. I said, well, I don't think I'm qualified to do this. I can't shoot commercials. It's not, you know, it's not, I don't know how to do it. He insisted I did it, and by the time I reached 24 years old, I got the award for the best photographed commercial. So he saw some sort of a talent in me that I, of course, didn't see. And sometimes somebody else has to point it out. And he insisted that I was that guy. And I learned an enormous amount from those guys. They were he was a Frenchman, born in Egypt, had a fantastic background, very smart, incredible taste. And I learned a lot from those guys. And they gave me actually the first shot at really moving up in the world at a very young age and get big responsibility on big budget commercials, etc., etc.
What was the commercial for?
That commercial was for stockings. Yolita nylons. It was a shot in black and white, a CinemaScope in those days for cinema. And it looked pretty good, I must say. But, you know, it is interesting. When you're in the film business that early on, and you don't know really, because it was difficult, because the latitude of film, et cetera, was so narrow that you really had to be right on the money and very precise to get the stuff right. And to be you know, basically I thought I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but somewhere I nailed it along the way. So, and I kept that feeling for a long time, that I didn't really know what I was doing, but I kept on doing the right thing for some mysterious reason that that I cannot explain to you.
What was the film business like in Holland in those days?
The film business was documentaries. It was really about documentaries, and but with Max, we started a commercial company. By the time I was 27 years old, we started our own commercial company, and we did a lot of work for the big agencies in New York City, for Madison Avenue, as it was known at that point. And we worked with all the big agents, with Walter Thompson, Young and Rubicam, all these guys. They all came to us, and they were looking for talent also. There's talent in Europe. And we were one of those guys. We got chosen because Max was he was a good businessman, but a super creative person also. And we just got it. So we did a lot of business for those guys. We started as a group of friends, consisting of me as a cinematographer, him as a director, and then we had a sound person that was part of it, and then we had a production manager. We had our team of 4 people, but then expanded, and then later on we bought a studio and we did all that stuff. But it was a very interesting time. But from documentaries alone, it was difficult to make a living of that. But at the same time, when I was at that age, I also got approached by the David Wolper organization, because they were also always looking for talent. And I did a special for David Wolper for National Geographic Society with a gentleman by the name of George Sluizer, who is a very, very good filmmaker, also a Dutch guy. And they asked me to, together with my brother, to shoot this special. And it was a special about the Portuguese fishermen that sailed in 100-year-old sailing schooners from Portugal to the North Pole and back, and did fishing long lines in dories, and so I did that in the meantime. And so that was quite an experience in itself. Actually, going back in time almost like 500 years, you know, and live under very, very primitive circumstances. In those days, they still went with sailing ships. In '67, believe it or not.
And then, what brought you to the States?
What brought me to the States was my wife, the second, who was from Paris, but she lived in Los Angeles, and she didn't want to go anywhere else. We tried to go back to Europe. She didn't. She said, "I'm not living in Europe anymore." And I lived here in Studio City, and we had a beautiful daughter, and I stayed in America.
So, what was your first job when you were in LA?
My first job, you know, I worked for Alan Landsberg quite a bit. But I worked on these In Search of series. So I did all the stand-ups with Leonard Nimoy, and I shot a whole bunch of these In Search of series. So that was the early days of me being in America. I did a special for KNBC with had Jack Lemmon involved. It was called Timetable for Disaster. I think we got an Emmy for that. I don't even remember, because in those days Emmys were so far away. As a footnote, I remember sitting in here in Los Angeles, looking at the TV and see all these people go to the Emmys, and I was so removed from that. I think, how do you ever get to that point that you are actually driving a limo and you get on the red carpet and you get an Emmy? And it was like, wow, you know, it was a whole different world. I didn't even think it was even remotely possible I would ever be associated with that. But those were my first jobs, and then I worked on a show called That's Incredible and Those Amazing Animals. And Alan, actually, I know Alan since '67 because he was the executive in charge on that special I did for National Geographic Society, and they got me involved. Yeah, there was another job I got. There's a children's series called Big Blue Marble, and that was produced out of New York. And Big Blue Marble, I went to, I think, probably 150 different countries, which ties in with the rest of my life. But we filmed all over the world children's games and what have you. And it was a successful program that actually also received Emmys and a Peabody Award and Action for Children Television Award. It It wasn't my show, obviously. It was Henry Founds' show, but I worked on that. That was my first big job in the United States.
Excellent. You did a show called the National Geographic The Invisible World. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I was cinematographer on The Invisible World with Alex Gregory and Eddie Garrick. And Alex has also been instrumental in pushing my career in America. He's been very, very generous, I must say. Really pushed me. And I shot The Invisible World for them. Was exciting. It's not easy to do, to shoot a film about, or a documentary about things the eye cannot see. And that's what it was all about. So we shot in electron microscopes, and you name it, we did it. And that documentary received also an Emmy and a Peabody Award, as you probably may know.
And then you directed something called Looking for Django Edwards. Was this the first time you directed?
That was, while in the commercial business, I was a director slash cinematographer. So I directed and shot a lot of, we did probably close to 2,000 commercials. But at that point with Django, that was a lot of fun. Django was an expatriate living in Holland. He's an outrageous character. And I directed and produced that show together with Arthur Epstein.
Excellent. And then you did Candid Camera.
We did Candid Camera with Alan Funt. I learned a lot of things from Alan.
Tell us a little bit about working with him.
Working with Alan was very, very interesting. He was, I would say, quite passionate about what he did. And I mean, a fascinating guy. He told me great stories, but also the way he operated was really good. He would have a tendency of being a very serious guy, and then in order to smile, he would go like, "Hey, I'm Alan Funt. So long, everybody. Show me the tape." So he was a little bit like that, It was really interesting. He's saying, "Cup of coffee, $1.25. I remember when it was 45 cents. He was a lot like that, But he was a terrific guy. I learned a lot from him. Certainly learned how to do Candid Camera. I mean, he had these phenomenal techniques that he had developed that a lot of people have used over the years.
Talk a little bit about the show. Were the reactions real? Was anything ever staged?
No, that was real. That was real. It was absolutely real. There's no question about it. Yeah. I mean, the setup was obviously there's a telephone there and there's a desk and they get people to do a job, et cetera, but then it would go all south, But it was absolutely real.
And then you worked for quite a while on a show called Cops.
Yeah.
So how did that come about?
John Langley and Malcolm Barber, my then very good friends, called me and they said, we'd like you to work on the show. I said, well, great, Weekly paycheck.
And for those who haven't seen it, what's the premise of that show?
The premise of the show is it's a ride-along in a police car. And we did this in over 120 different jurisdictions around America. I spent 8 years in a police car, believe it or not. Had an incredible amount of fun. And the way I approached it was John made me the producer of the show, and I was also the lead cinematographer on it. The way I approach it, I approach it as a French cinema verite movie with instant casting. So you go to a situation and you look around. Oh, there's the mother-in-law, there's the guy, there's the dead guy, there's this, there's that. Okay, and you look around and you figure out who the characters are going to be that you do the story with, which I now call instant casting. And then not interfere in anything. You couldn't interfere in anything. No desire. So for me, it was an incredible, brand new art form. And John Langley said to me one thing, which was brilliant. He says, never bring a tripod. I don't want to have any tripods on the show. It was brilliant, I mean, and I didn't quite trust it because I was still a little bit of a tripod guy at times because it was beaten into us in our life. But the whole show was shot handheld. And all the running and all the jumping over the fences and following the people and getting shot at and getting beaten. I mean, I got whacked with a 2x4 out cold. I mean, you name it. We were in the middle of combat. And it was a fantastic experience. I don't know off the top of my head how many shows I've produced and shot for John and Malcolm, but it's in the hundreds. It was a lot of fun, and I saw the dark side of America in many, many ways, until a point came that people said, you know, there's a lot of violence in television. There's a tremendous amount of violence. So there was a lot of journalists, and they asked me, and they said, you know, it's very violent what you guys do, which to a degree was actually true. You know, we were going for it. And I said to the guy, never forget, I said, violent, Cops is not a violent show. Cops is a comedy. And everybody understood what I was saying, right? And yeah, it is, in many ways, it is a comedy.
How so? What do you mean?
Well, because there's a lot of humor in a show like this. There's a tremendous amount of misunderstandings and stupidity and more stupidity. So yeah, there's a lot of humor in that world, I must say. In addition to, yeah, there's tragedy. You know, there's people that.
You mentioned John Langley. Tell us a little bit about working with him.
It was a lot of fun working with him. He left me completely alone. Never really interfered in any shape or form.
And talk a little bit about working with Jerry Bruckheimer on the show.
Well, Jerry and I, through Jonathan Littman, you know, CAA, actually, our agency, said, Jerry wants to get into television. This is how it was explained to me. And he wants to talk to you. I said, well, Jerry Bruckheimer is a very big movie producer, and I'm a little TV guy. But CAA and everybody insisted we talk. I said, what am I going to do with Jerry? I mean, there's nothing. But the reality was that we all hit it off tremendously, and that we have the same, if I may say so, we have the same taste for things, and we like the same things on many levels. And I thought, wow, this is a great opportunity, because in those days, reality television didn't exist as we know it now. 12 years ago, 13 years ago. It's hard to imagine it didn't exist. Not in the long form. It existed in the Cops form, in very short bursts of 3-minute storytelling. But now we tell a story over 12 hours. I said, you know what? The combination of what I do, the reality that we are used to, and that we have now sold to a major primetime network, being CBS, and Les Moonves, who has faith in this genre. Combine that with a movie maker as Jerry, you know, we can all learn from each other, and we can do something fantastic together. And that's really what we have done. I mean, Jerry is not involved in the sense on a day-by-day basis, but I can call him anytime, and we talk, and we have, you know, and there's a fantastic relationship between their company, Jonathan Littman, who's a very dear friend of mine, who runs their television business, and my company, World Race Productions and Profiles Television. We're separate entities, but we're family, and I think we've learned a lot from each other, and you know, these guys come up with some phenomenal suggestions, and and when we go on stage and pick up an Emmy, it's not so bad either, you know. So it's been, you know, I think it's important that we raise the bar with reality television, because yeah, it has evolved in many, many different offsprings of all kinds of stuff, you know, that there's room for everybody, I'd say that, but I like to keep the bar pretty high, and as a result, I just did a new series also with Brian Grazer and Ron Howard. We did The Great Escape, where we really tried to raise the bar, you know, for TNT. So I think it's very valuable to work with people of the movie genre together with us and make it better.
What did you learn from doing Cops that you took to your future reality shows?
Well, you know, the stuff that you learn on a show like this is the freedom that we have, that the camera is an extension of your eye. It's not an instrument that is where everybody has to stand around and becomes the centerpiece of thing. It's just an extension of an odd extension of your eye. It's a 50-pound extension of your eye. So the guys that I like to work with, and I had the same opportunity. I work with a man by the name of Irwin Roston, as you probably know who he is. And Irwin was the producer, writer, director, did a lot of stuff for National Geographic Society. And he told me, I will create a situation for you, and then you just go shoot it. Which is great for a guy like me, because I want to do my own thing. I'm a director, cameraman. And he was a producer. I like to do the same thing. I had that same opportunity to do that on Fox, on Cops. Be your own guy, tell the story, you see it. But then what you do is you explain it to the rest of the gang, to the rest of the other 8 cameramen that walk around and say, this is how we're going to do it. This is how you shoot cinema verite. This is how you follow action. This is how you follow the story. And this is, so not just shoot a picture, but listen. This is one thing that a lot of cameramen have a hard time with. I've been one for many, many years. But listening is the key, of course, to where the camera should be pointed. So, and now we have groomed a huge army of people that know how to do this, that listen and shoot at the same time. So the camera is just an instrument that you run with, but you know by heart how to operate that thing. It is now listening and telling a story. And that is kind of what we expanded. We did it in Cops, but then we expanded that then into a huge formats of 12-hour storylines, et cetera, in a very complex setting.
In 1996, you created Wild Things. Tell us a little bit about that show.
Wild Things, I looked at, since I had a long relationship with National Geographic Society, probably over 30 years. We're on and off as a freelance relationship. And I thought, I see more and more of this, high-end kind of wildlife filmmaking with the London Philharmonic in the background and British voices explaining the wildlife. And it became very elitist. It felt very elitist. Wildlife felt very elitist, felt very white man elitist. And I said, this is not wildlife, what wildlife is. What wildlife really is you see this lion in these movies, you see the lion laying, and you see Mount Kilimanjaro in the background. I said, but what we do is you see the same lion in front of Mount Kilimanjaro, but we start close on the lion eating on the zebra, and we pull out, and we zoom out, and we keep zooming out, and we see there's 8 minibuses with Japanese tourists around there, with idling engines, and the lion is choking on the fumes. I said, that's how we do it. That's how I'm going to do it, because that is the truth of wildlife filmmaking nowadays. It's a mess. All they do is darting animals and re-darting them and chasing with helicopters and all this kind of nonsense. And they made these documentaries that were just not truthful. So I went to Paramount, to Frank Kelly. I said, what we should do is we should just completely change this whole genre and tell them really how this is. And because I know I go around the world all the time, and I know what you're seeing there is nonsense. It's complete pure nonsense, and it's a misrepresentation. And it is like a form of neo-colonial filmmaking on top of it. So he said, this is actually a no-brainer. So we went out and did this series, and basically at one point the BBC called us wildlife paparazzi and all this kind of, which I took as a compliment, by the way, because we never missed a beat. I said, if you want to film a lion, it doesn't take 18 months to film this lion to eat and do his thing. I said, we stay with this pack of lions for 1 week. I guarantee you he will kill. I guarantee you he will do all the stuff that you need to have. So yeah, we became a real threat to that kind of filmmaking, and people didn't like it. And I give you one example. We were filming in a cave in Borneo, and everybody's always looking for the longest snake. So we found a snake. The thing was 24.5 feet long. And what the system was that I used is we take scientists and then we follow these scientists instead of having some voiceover in London in the booth. We have the scientists tell us right there on the spot what's going on. So we goes with the scientist in this cave. He knows everything about these snakes. We go in there, and the scientists get caught by the snake, and the snake almost kills him. It just wraps around him, and the guy, he's gone. And then we brought in a whole bunch of guys from Indonesia, and they got the snake off him, et cetera, et cetera. And I showed it at the Wildlife Film Festival. And of course, here were the people from the other side of the ocean. Well, this was scandalous, and how dare we? And this is not the way to show wildlife and all this kind of stuff. I said, well, he says, we are scientists. And I said, well, the difference between you and me is that you are a scientist and I'm a filmmaker. And we film the scientist doing his job. Now, if he gets caught by a python that's 24 feet long, what do you want me to do about it? My job is to film, see how he gets himself out of this thing. So that's kind of... So we changed the whole genre. unfortunately, I didn't get enough credit for it because now everybody's doing it. I mean, Discovery Geographic, everybody is doing exactly that. What we did, you know, guys out in the field, climb in the tree, get chased by the Komodo dragon, go in East Africa, fly around in helicopters, do the thing. So, and that spawned this entire adventure genre that we did with that I did with Paramount and Frank Kelly and all the great people that worked there at that time that had a real vision.
Were you still behind the camera on this show, or?
Yeah, I've grabbed the camera for a long time. I mean, I could not stay away from it. I mean, yeah, it's just in me. But I've gotten hurt a couple of times, you know, in accidents and stuff like that. So it's a little hard for me now to walk around with a 50-pound camera. But and I simply don't have the time anymore. Also, but yeah, I am there as a filmmaker, and then a little bit of nothing, and then businessman.
Right. So before we bring in Elise, we just have a few final questions. How did you and Elise meet?
Elise and I met. I was doing a television special, a pilot for Stephen Chow, that was at that point at Fox, who, by the way, is a dear friend, also very instrumental in Cops and what have you. And he asked me to shoot a show in New York, which I was doing, and I needed a painting. I needed a big painting, and my assistant says, you know, I know this girl, she has a gallery, but she also has a business, and she has a bunch of paintings hanging on the wall, they're good paintings. Why don't we ask her? So we went there, and Elise comes out the door, and Elise is an amazing woman. And I was instantly taken by her, and I tried to negotiate this painting, but she said, no, you can buy it. I said, I'll give you $100. We carried it across the street. She said, no, you have to buy this painting that you want is $4,000, and and there's no negotiation. I said, then I said to my assistant, I said, can you ask her if she wants to go out with me tonight? I didn't even want to ask her. I was so intimidated by her beauty. And that is 17 years ago. That's how we met.
And did you work on any TV shows together prior to The Amazing Race?
Yeah, Elise worked with me on Wild Things. She worked on the pilot for Wild Things. We were in Africa and we were in Alaska. And that's kind of where we met the first time, yeah. And she also was not crazy of me in doing Cops. She went around with me a couple of times. She says, you need to stop this. This is not good. This is not a good environment. Because it did affect who I am as a person. No matter how macho you try to be about it, you know, you see a homicide, you see suicide, you see a lot of ugly things. And she said, you need to stop this. It changes you as a person. It changes the language you're using. It changes, and it made you something that you are not. And she recognized that, and God bless her soul, you know, she got me out of that. And that's when I sold Wild Things.
Excellent. So traveling around the world, how hard is it to maintain a home life?
Well, you know, I've been a road warrior my whole life, you know, so there's nothing new there. I mean, my first flight was a flight to Ireland from Amsterdam when I was 21 years old on a commercial plane. And it was an adventure, you know. In those days, you dress up and you put on a tie to go. In those days, it's hard to. Now people come roll out of bed and they sit there and slobber food. But no, it has never affected negatively our home life. It is what we do. Traveling around the world now is much easier than it was in the 70s or in the 60s. 70s, the great thing, there was Pan Am that flew in many different directions around the globe, and I've made major use of that. It was fantastic, but it was still an exclusive party. It was still very expensive. I remember we used to go to Africa for 3 months because there was no flying back and forth, but the production didn't have the money because it was only for rich people to go on airplanes. So for us to sit on an airplane was special. But no, it hasn't affected our home life. The world is a very, very small place for us now. The biggest waste of time for me is sitting on an airplane 15, 17 hours. I want to be there. It's not going fast enough. But Elise also knows the world very, very well. And she knows every hotel room where we stay. And it's almost, the world has become home. Yeah. And she knows I can be back from anywhere in the world, from the South Pole, North Pole, Africa, anywhere in the Kalahari Desert. I can be home in less than 24 hours.
Okay. What do you think is your legacy in television?
I don't know what my legacy is. I mean, I have tried, and I'm trying always to be really, really original, come up with fresh ideas, which is difficult. It's usually difficult to sell because, you know, people only want to buy either derivatives or something that makes sure that keeps them their job, you know, and I can't blame them for that. But what I'm trying to do is that we come up with ideas that not only keep people their job, but also give them their success for the one that writes the check. But I like it. I would like to be seen as a guy that was inventive and tried everything with the camera, the extension of your eye, and try to every step of the way go with technology and tell stories, no matter where they come from, how bizarre, how weird, and I think I've had something to do with opening up the world into reality television as we now know it, and has become a global multi-billion-dollar business. You know, and I think I have a fair amount to do with it. I'm still running around like a lunatic, trying to make it better and trying to catch that moment.
How has cinematography changed since you first started?
Well, I think not only cinematography has changed, but also acting. I think it has changed because of all the equipment is so much easier to use, etc., etc. You can shoot almost under any condition, any light condition, and make it real, etc., etc. I think so. The technology, the advance of technology has been phenomenal, absolutely stunning. Although the industrial design of cameras is not always good. They still design cameras with the viewfinder here, and the camera is right there. It should be really here with the viewfinder there. But anyway, I think acting has changed as a result of the reality genre. I remember very, very vividly that a lot of actors would call and say, "Can we see the scene that you guys did on Cops there and see how you did that?" So they can learn from it. I think acting has to... Look, at the end of the day, it used to be Car 54, Where Are You? Then it was Chips, and then it became Cops. And they're all three police shows. But it almost tells you how evolved this whole thing has become. And that also has translated across the genre in wildlife filmmaking, in reality storytelling. And I think acting has changed a lot also because of that. It all feels more normal. It all feels less stilted and outside the classics, of course.
How have the audiences changed?
Audience has changed. I think the audience has changed because, you know, there's so much stuff that you can do and see and be distracted. So what we do also, our shows are edited faster. People get it quicker. I mean, you don't have to string it out anymore. They got it. And it's not easy to keep their attention, you know, and even for a period of 10 years, 12 years, keep their attention with the same show. So you have to be very inventive what you give them. But I think the concentration levels has of course sped up. You know, they need. I mean, for them it's very hard to not to get bored very, very quickly. People have seen so much and have heard so much, and so you have to stay always a little bit ahead of that.
Excellent. Well, we're going to stop now, bring in Elise,
All right.
and we'll come back.
Thank you.